So in fact, we do not start completely from scratch. Now, I'm very happy to say that we are joined by an excellent panel of four highly esteemed persons. And the discussion of today will be kicked off by Mr. Giacomo Benedetto, holder of the Jean Monnet Chair in EU Budget Policy at the Royal Holloway University of London. Mr. Benedetto has published extensively on matters of EU policy, and more recently, his focus has turned to the study of package deals in European Union policy making. And I've asked Mr. Benedetto to be as concise as possible and to try to limit his intervention to no more than 8 minutes. And much to my delight, he indicated to me, well, within 5 minutes this should be done. So after the keynote speech of Mr. Benedetto, we will turn to the other members of the panel. And by now, I think we are complete. So welcome. No, well, that happens. I know that stretch quite well, actually. Yeah, I know it happens. So to my right, we have Mr. Takacs, Minister of State for European Affairs in the Prime Minister's office, if I understand correctly, of Hungary. Then to my left, Mr. Alberto Nadal Belda, State Secretary for the Budget and Expenditure in Spain. And then the last arrival, Mr. Karel Luyben, Rector of the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. And I want to already thank you for taking the time to enlighten us with your insights. So to the other panel members, I would also ask to be as concise as possible, trying to keep the intervention to 5 minutes. I've heard that this maybe was a bit different than instructed. But I still would ask you to do your best, because whatever happens, we need to finish a quarter to 11, and I would be very delighted if we would have some time for interaction with the audience. So with this, I would like to invite Mr. Benedetto to take the floor and to deliver his keynote remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for the invitation. I'm going to start by just saying something very briefly about how we should all understand added value as additionality, and why the European Union can offer this as something which is a bonus of EU membership before we get into questions of net balance. So what is added value? Well, added value offers a saving with transaction costs. There's the idea that running an expenditure policy at the European level is cheaper than running 28 or 27 national expenditure policies. So there are savings in transaction costs. Those would be transaction costs for policies that could be run perhaps more expensively at the national level. The second feature of added value are cross-border benefits. And we see notable policy or funding streams such as the Connecting Europe program, where across borders infrastructure is constructed in order to facilitate economic growth and to build and further enhance the internal market. And finally, the third aspect of added value are those of threshold effects. These are investment policies which would be too expensive for any one member state to embark on alone, but where collectively the organization of expenditure at the European level allows for the acquisition of some new objective which would be impossible at national level. And here I would give examples such as ITER or the satellite program. So these are the areas of really where added value offers something at the European level that you cannot have at national level. In order to get there, we have a problem with the net balance approach, and I will be disagreeing in the few minutes left with my colleague Friedrich Heinemann. I think it is possible to get away from rebates as we've understood them, particularly given the fact that the UK is leaving the European Union. Part of the method for achieving an added value budget policy for the EU will be reform of own resources, if that is delivered, which would reduce the extent to which the budget is financed directly from member states' GNI, wouldn't abolish it, it would reduce the GNI dependence, and where that money would come from, instead of from GNI, would be through forms of financing that have an added value effect of their own. And I'm thinking in particular of some of the possibilities. For example, taxation in relation to climate change, carbon taxation, or on transnational corporations, which would enhance the internal market. And that could be part of an added value feature of finance raising that contributes or goes hand in hand with reforms to a budget that can expand investment in research and innovation for jobs and growth. In terms of net balances, in some sense, the analogy is flawed. For example, just to take the example of research and innovation, for certain, there will be countries whose research base is advanced and to which contracts are awarded. But in the field of scientific research, if innovations are achieved, it's not only the university or the enterprise that receives the contract that is benefiting from money. It's not as if ITER is purely a transfer policy that sends money to France, where much of ITER's funds are located in terms of the infrastructures. We have a policy in the fields of scientific research that will bring benefits to the whole of the EU, whether it's in the field of nuclear fusion or satellites or whatever. And some of these benefits are not even economic. If they are enhancing the well-being of citizens, it goes, for example, through the field of medical research. We see benefits that go beyond the purely economic. So to think of these areas of expenditure as if they're simple transfers is flawed. But in then besides what it lies purely within the 1% GNI EU budget, we also have to evaluate the effect of these financial flows in funds outside of the EU budget, starting with EFSI, but there's also the ESM and many other funds and instruments that lie outside of the formal EU budget. And if we compute them, they're well above 2%, even getting to 3% of GNI once we put in the value of the ESM. Now, so in moving to this research and innovation budget, where I see a potential issue is with perhaps with cohesion countries whose research base and innovation base is relatively low. And in order to embark on this reform, we need to have a package deal that can really offer something to everybody, which is a collective gain for all. For certain, a budget which raises some of its financing from instruments like a corporation income tax would be preferable in some respects as a form of financing to those countries whose economies are less developed than others. At the same time, the cohesion policy can be much more focused on delivering sustainable economic growth well beyond the period of financing, for example, in fields such as ICT infrastructure, CEF, connecting peripheral regions and economies with modern transportation systems, and energy networks, and in particular energy security, which among some of the cohesion countries, energy security is a major concern. So finally, what I'd say is that we have, particularly if we go in the direction of some forms of financing, we have potential doubts from some member states with regard to carbon taxation, and there is a case for having a new rebate system not based on net balances, on net contributions, but on gross contributions. So if a particular form of financing for the budget somehow, as a percentage of a country's GNI, seems to be abnormally high, as it would be in the case of carbon taxation for a handful of member states, a form of rebate on the gross contribution rather than a net contribution could be considered. And then that will not discourage the uptake of EU funding by such member states, and such a rebate could be in the form of investment precisely in areas of research and innovation as part of that wider package deal. So one of the problems with the British rebate is that it's cash, essentially, without any conditions. Any future rebate on gross contributions, we could consider a system which would not be without conditions. The conditions would be to use such funds to part finance investment in research and innovation.